I think this is one of the first times I've ever brought printouts to a YouTube video before. This is a new one for me. Right. Hello everybody, welcome back to the channel. Hope you don't mind me being sat on my bed again. Tom's using the office today, so I thought I would try and shake things up a little bit. Also, there literally is nowhere else for me to film in my house at the moment because downstairs our dining room is being remodelled and the kitchen is full of the dining room furniture. So there's nowhere downstairs I can film. Our bedroom and our office are kind of like the most kind of normal places to film at the moment, so hopefully you can forgive me. But today I wanted to do a little bit of a chatty video. I'm sitting off to one side because I'm going to be putting kind of photos and things up on the side of the screen here, so you're not just going to be looking at my bed all day anyway. But I wanted to have a little chat with you about ways that you can support Black History Month within the heritage sector. So my background is I have worked in heritage for a number of years and I did a master's in country house studies at the University of Leicester. So my kind of background and work upbringing, I suppose you could call it, is very much firmly entrenched within the heritage sector, and my two books that I've written about women's history are within the country house sector as well. So I'm very kind of passionate, I'm very, I'd say knowledgeable, but also there are definitely gaps in my knowledge. I wouldn't say I'm an expert in country house studies or heritage, but it's definitely an area that I know a lot about and that I'm really, really passionate about as well. And it's also an area that is having to kind of rethink the way that it presents itself to the public at the moment, or is choosing to do that, because it's obviously come to light a lot recently and in the public eye that a lot of country houses are connected to income that's been generated through slavery and or colonialism. And following the Black Lives Matter campaigns during COVID, during the pandemic, during 2020, a lot of heritage places committed to looking into their own Black history and their own connections to the Black British community, and also connections to colonialism and the slave trade within kind of their properties or within their organisation. So it's an area that I feel really strongly about and really passionately about, and have done since before 2020. I believe that the heritage sector should be doing more to look into these narratives, to look into this kind of origin of wealth, and just to be telling those stories. You know, it's not about going back and kind of changing the past or anything like that, but just making sure those stories are told and are not just swept under the rug and forgotten is something that I feel really strongly about. So I wanted to kind of make something that is positive about that, that kind of says and encourages the heritage sector and people who like heritage, who have enjoyed spending time at heritage now, to be able to support the heritage sector in making those changes. And there's a few different ways. I think there's kind of 3 sections that I've created in this video that I'm hoping will show you ways that you can still engage with the heritage sector and engage with Black History Month and support the kind of connection and the combination of both of those 2 things coming together. So let's get started. So one of the things you can do is you can actually go and visit a lot of these heritage sites that are putting the work in to explore their own narrative and explore their own history connected to the slave trade and colonialism. And there's a lot of different properties that are doing this, and I've just decided that I would focus mainly on English heritage at the moment, mainly because I've actually visited an English heritage property that has this exhibition that I'm going to go on to talk about, and I've seen the painting in situ at one of their properties, and so that's why I picked it. I'll go on to talk about other organisations and how you can go to other places around the country, but I thought I'd start first with English heritage. So I used to work for English heritage, and I used to work at a place called Kirby Hall in Northamptonshire, and it was there that I saw the painting of James Chapel by Glory Samjolly. So Glory used to work in a lot of Renaissance halls, and she loved to look at the art, but she didn't see herself represented in it anywhere. And she said that it made her think about how she could represent the Black Europeans that she didn't see in her artwork and put it into a world that she loves. And that was kind of her inspiration for creating the painting of James Chapel. So James Chapel was a servant at Kirby Hall from 1672 when he became a servant at the age of 15. And in 1706, when Christopher Hatton died, James Chapel was actually given a pension, and he lived in the local area and became a landlord of the local pub. And that's quite unusual for a servant to be given a pension and not have to move on to a new place of work. So we can see there that he was really highly regarded in his role within the Hatton family and at Kirby Hall. And Glory Sam Jolly, who created this painting, said that she wanted to give him the presence that he was there and no longer a hidden figure. And she said he's part of the story. Those are her words. And that's why she wanted to paint it in the way that she has done. So this is a painting, and you will have seen that because I've popped some pictures up on the side while I was discussing that. But this is just one of the paintings in a series called Painting Our Past, the African Diaspora in England. And this is some copy taken from the English Heritage website, which I'm just going to read out to you about the kind of exhibition, what the thoughts were behind it and why they've done it. So English Heritage has commissioned a series of portraits depicting 6 historic figures from the African diaspora whose stories have contributed to England's rich history. Each artist has been supported by our curators and historians to creatively portray their subject. The paintings are currently on display at the English Heritage site connected to its subject. Learn more about the commissioned artists and their subjects on their website. So there's a really great short documentary about this project on the English Heritage website, and I'll pop the link down in the description box so you can go straight through to the project page from Painting Our Past. It's a really, really fascinating page actually, and you can see all of the paintings and learn more about each individual artist that created the 6 paintings, and just generally learn more about the project. You can see the short documentary, like I say, I think it's about 20 minutes long, which is really great. And it's just a really good website for learning more about it all. So there are, like I say, 6 paintings. I'm saying 6, that's obviously 5. 6. There are 6 paintings, and the first one, this is in no particular order, but I'm just reading them out here. The first one is of Septimius Severus, who was a Roman general, and that is displayed at Corbridge Roman Town at Hadrian's Wall in Northumberland, and that was painted by Elena Onwache Garcia. And so, yeah, that's one painting that you can go and see if you're very far up north. If you're down south, you can go to St Augustine's Abbey in Kent, and you can see a painting of Abbot Hadrian, which was painted by Clifton Powell. If you go to Kenwood House in London, you can see a painting of Dido Bell, and that was painted by Michaela Henry Lowe. If you go to Osborne House on the Isle of Wight, you can see a painting of Sarah Forbes Bonetta, which is painted by Hannah Uzo. And again, if you're up north, if you go to Berwick-upon-Tweed Barracks in Northumberland, you can see a painting of Arthur Roberts, which was painted by Chloe Cox. And again, if you're in the Midlands, you can go to Kirby Hall in Northampton, which is where I went to, and see the painting of James Chapel, which was painted by Glory Samjolly. So that exhibition actually opened on the 9th of June 2021, and I believe it's still going. All of the portraits, I believe, are going to be there permanently on permanent displays, so you can go now and have a look at them. And like I say, you can visit any of those locations, learn more about the characters and how they interacted with those properties where they have been painted, because those properties are where those historical characters either lived or visited or spent significant periods of time. So they are connected to the properties themselves. So that's just like one example. I wanted to kind of shine a spotlight on English heritage as an example, but there are a number of other heritage properties and organisations that are doing the work to explore their own story. So National Trust is another very prominent organisation that most people in the UK have heard of. It is an organisation that takes and purchases or is gifted significant large country houses and estates, and takes them under trust, looks after them, preserves them and opens them to the public every year. And the National Trust commissioned a report on the connections to the slave trade across their entire portfolio of properties in the UK. And this was really, really controversial. Now, most people will have heard, or I would have thought will have heard of this, but if you work in heritage specifically, this has been making ripples and waves across the heritage industry for the last 2 years. And that's because the National Trust commissioned this report, and basically the government and several factions in the government basically thought it was horrendous. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail on this particular topic, the National Trust report, but I could do another video about it if you're interested to understand more, because it is quite complicated and a lot of the newspapers and things obviously have an agenda when they report these, so you don't necessarily get a balanced opinion on it. You get either a right-wing or a left-wing view on this. So if you want me to do another video, let me know and I will prepare it for some point in the future and publish it. But basically the report was to map and give information about each property of the National Trust and what its individual connection was to the slave trade or colonialism. And each property was portfolioed and then a report was generated. Now, the bit that becomes a bit controversial is the fact that the report was actually published with names rather than just being a report by the National Trust. And that became a real problem because the lady who was the front name on that report was called Corinne Fowler, and she was one of the only females on the report, and she was also one of the only kind of external people that were brought in to help with the report. And for some reason, she specifically was hugely targeted as a result of putting this report together. But I am so proud that both the National Trust and the heritage sector in general absolutely came together, supported Corinne Fowler and supported the report, and actually nobody has bowed down as a result of it. It has made some organisations slightly more cautious in the way that they present these reports and this evidence to the public. You know, there's no putting a single person's name out now because obviously they can then become the victim of targeting. And so it's changed things slightly, but it hasn't stopped organisations from exploring narratives. Now, still a lot of work to be done, and different organisations, different properties have different levels of commitment to exploring these narratives. But I think that over a whole, the kind of museum and heritage industry are really working to try and explore those narratives a bit more, and to bring those narratives out and discuss them and talk to them, and put on exhibitions that encourage visitors and the public to think about it as well. So there's another organisation that I briefly wanted to mention, which is called Facing the Past. It's based up in Lancaster. Now, Lancaster was one of the UK's biggest slave imports, and Lancaster as a city are committing to a new project called Facing the Past, which is basically about them investigating the port's historic links to the slave trade and presenting a series of exhibitions, events, different heritage trails, lots of different ways that the local community and people across the country could go and engage with Lancaster's slaving history. So if you want to know more about that, I highly recommend that you look at Facing the Past in Lancaster. Again, I'll put a link in my description. Yes, there's lots of other places that you could go, that you can visit for kind of understanding more and support those venues in those projects that they're putting on. Liverpool has an international slavery museum, which I didn't actually know about, but I am going to go and visit in the next few weeks. And so I might put a little vlog video up about my visit to that museum. And that's really great. It talks about international slavery, so not just Britain's connection to the slave trade, but the whole and modern slavery and also historic slavery as well. So it looks like a really interesting museum. I'm really looking forward to learning more about the British slave trade through my visit there. And you can go to the Museums Association website, which again, I'll pop a link to. That's got a really great list of different museums and heritage centres that are committing to Black History Month and are putting on specific events or exhibitions or projects or research all around their connections to slavery, colonialism and Black British history. So I really highly recommend that if you're looking for something to do to show your support this month to those venues, that you go and have a look at that website and find somewhere that you could go that's local to you, or that is a little bit of a drive but is well worth going to. So the next big thing you can do throughout Black History Month is read books about Black British history and about Black British history and Britain's connection to slave trade and colonialism. Now, I have got some suggestions here of books, but obviously there are a number of books out there. I've just picked ones that either I have read or ones that are on my to-read list, and they're a mixture of fiction and non-fiction books. So non-fiction is obviously the best type of book to read when you are looking into history, because it has to be written in a way that has facts that are verified before they can be published. So a lot of non-fiction can sometimes be have an opinion or have a slight angle to it, but to be honest, it's better than the fiction that you would read alternatively. The first book that I think is great for you to read is called Black and British, A Forgotten History by David Olusoga, and there's also an illustrated version of this, so conversations can actually be done with children, which I think is really great. I mean, the book itself looks fantastic. This is not one that I've read, but it is on my to-do list. It's on my to-read list, so I will be getting hold of it. But I love the fact that there is an illustrated version for families so that you can start that discussion, start that conversation a lot younger. Another one is Natives, Race and Class in the Ruins of Empire by Akala. This is one that I really have been wanting to read for a long time, but I picked up a number of other books about Black British history a while ago, and so I've been waiting for the next kind of time that I buy books to get this one as well, but it's one that I'm really kind of wanting to read. Why I'm No Longer Talking to White People About Race by Reni Eddo Lodge. I'm actually currently reading this one. I have a book at the side of my kettle so that whenever I'm boiling the kettle I can just read a couple of pages of text, just another way for me to try and kind of incorporate book reading into my day, and that's the one that I'm reading at the moment, and it's about Reni's own personal journey with conversations around blackness and around Black British history, but also it's got, from the bits that I've read so far, it does have a lot of sections about Black British history, so you can learn as well as understand experience as well as history at the same time. Me and White Supremacy by Layla Saad. Now this is actually like a project book, and I read this and went through this book with a reading group back in 2020. And it's about looking at your own position in culture, and if you are a white person, understanding Black British history and the position of yourself within your community and how you can become a better ally to people of colour, all people of colour, but specifically to the Black communities as well. And it kind of is I'm really glad that it's like a project book, because what it does is it encourages you, it asks you questions, and it encourages you to sit down and journal on who you are, the privileges that I have been given as a white person, and how I can be a better and stronger ally to people of colour. And if I see instances of institutional or general day-to-day racism, how I can kind of be part of that narrative to try and stop that and to try and improve opportunities and the world for people of colour. So it's a really great book. It was one of those books that once you've read it, once you know that knowledge, once you understand, you can never go back. You can never unknow that knowledge. You can never go back to the person that you were before. And that's really powerful, because it made me feel like I understood things a lot more. And I had to deal with a lot of kind of shame about not understanding more about Black British history and not understanding more about my own privileged position, but I worked through that, and I think it's a really important book to go through. So it's not necessarily connected to heritage, but literature and kind of understanding the history is really important and does support heritage and does support those kind of research institutes. So those were all non-fiction books, and like I say, I have read other ones, and there are others that are on my to read list. This is just kind of a bit of a short list really to give you a couple of ideas for the books that you could read, because obviously we're now coming to the middle of the month. I encourage you to read these at any time of the year. You shouldn't just be picking up things about Black British history because it's Black History Month, but obviously this month gives us the opportunity to shine a spotlight on that. So if there's any others that you have read that you think are great that you would like to recommend to me, let me know in the comments, and I will put the list into the description box so that you can go and have a look for them as well. So the other thing you can do is you can read fiction books. Now, it is fiction, so it's one person's kind of narrative that they've created around a particular topic, but if you find reading non-fiction books really difficult, or you don't find them very engaging, then rather than not doing anything, do the next best thing, which is basically reading historical fiction. You're still learning about a culture, you're still learning about a group of people who have been oppressed or have been subject to racism. You're just learning about it in a slightly different way. And obviously you can't take what happens in that fiction book as gospel because it is fictionalised, but the context, the experiences, the kind of the feeling and the tone and the narrative you can take from that. So I found a few books that I've read recently, and other books that are also on my to-read list again, and I thought we'd just go through them quickly here. So the first one was one that I thought of instantly when I was putting this list together, and it's called Blood and Sugar by Laura Shepherd Robinson. Now I have read this, I've done a book review on it, so I'll link up the original video here, but it's basically about London and the connection to the slave trade in London, and it's set during the slaving period. So it's set I think actually it's kind of on the cusp of abolition. There's a lot of abolitionist kind of activity going on within the context of the book, and so it talks about kind of England and London around that time when it's starting to become less mainstream and more discussion around slavery and abolishment, that kind of thing. It's a really, really good book. It's actually Shepherd Robinson's first, and I believe she's gone on to do a couple of others that are in the same time period. So I don't know if the others do deal with the slave trade in the way that the first does, but as they're all around the same historical time period, I wouldn't be surprised if there aren't more conversations and context around that as you go through. So the other one is called Sacred Hunger by Barry Unsworth. Now, I haven't read this one, but I thought it sounded really interesting, so it's one that I'm going to pick up. I'll just read the back of it to you. It says, taking place in England during the Age of Enlightenment, Sacred Hunger is a historical novel following Matthew Paris, a physician. His wife, Ruth, died while he was imprisoned for writings contrary to the Bible. Left with nothing, Paris accepts a job on the Liverpool Merchant, a slave ship owned by his uncle William Kemp. But as the ship sets sail with its African cargo, disease strikes and threatens mutiny. So I thought that would be interesting to read. Obviously, it is written from the perspective of a white person, so it's I would say you will have to come through it through the lens of it being narrated by a white person, but I think it will be very interesting to understand more about that kind of historical context of being what it was like to be on a slave ship during that time period. And the next one that I thought would be quite good is called A Respectable Trade by Philippa Gregory, and I'll read the blurb again for this one. It says, taking place in Bristol in 1787, A Respectable Trade introduces Frances Scott, a wealthy, well-connected Englishwoman. She agrees to a mutually convenient marriage with a merchant, Josiah Cole. Together, they develop a respectable fortune by trading sugar, rum and slaves. Mahuru, a former priest from Yoruba, is amongst their newest slaves. Drawn to his warm, caring nature, Frances finds an intimate bond with Mahuru that sparks forbidden love. Now, I've said I think this one would be good. I actually am not too sure about this one, only because I haven't really read a lot of the earlier works of Philippa Gregory. I've read obviously a lot more of her modern things, but I'm interested because it's written quite a while ago. I'm interested to know how it was written. Obviously, again, it's from the perspective of a white person, so it could be a little bit of a problematic text, but as it's actually dealing with the time period and it has an enslaved person as one of the former main characters, I thought it might be quite interesting to read, especially because it's British slave history as well. I thought it might be a good one to read just to understand more about how the British slave trade operated and what the main kind of slave ship owners were like. Obviously, there's a lot of American narratives that deal with the history of slavery in America from the perspective of enslaved people, and I definitely think you should go and read those. But I was concentrating more on Black British history and the British slave trade, and so that's why these ones, there isn't actually a lot of text out there. There's not a lot of books out there. In fact, I couldn't really find any that are written by Black writers about the Black British slave trade from the perspective of an enslaved person. So if there are any out there and you know of them, please do put them in the comments and I will read them and I'll mention them on my Instagram. Sorry, I just wanted to add a little bit of extra context here because obviously I know that the slave trade, Britain within the movement of enslaved people was very much considered the middle point, and that people who had been captured from Africa came to England and then from England moved over to America. And so I know that I'm just anticipating that people saying, oh well, you know, England was part of the Middle Passage, which is what the name was for that process of moving to England and then over to America. And I know that most enslaved people ended up working in America, but there were enslaved people who ended up coming to England and worked and lived in England as well. So I just wanted to have some context there because I am aware that it's a lot more nuanced than just all enslaved people went to America to work on plantations and work in the different industries over there. That's what I was saying, is that there aren't any narratives that I could find that deal with those people who came to England, stayed in England and were enslaved in England, or there aren't that many narratives about the Middle Passage that I could find specifically. So yeah, just wanted to explain that a little bit more before anybody puts it in the comments that that's why there isn't anything. And I do still think that texts written about the experience in America obviously will still to some extent include some descriptions of the passage over to America. It's just a very specific kind of area of British slaving history that I think there is a gap for in terms of narratives. So yeah, hope that explains it. Sorry if that wasn't clear in my original comment. But yeah, that's why I picked these ones, because they dealt with the British slave trade, even though they are from the perspective of a white character. So yeah, like I say, there are lots of other fiction books out there that do deal with the slave trade in general, the like global slave trade, and a lot of really great narratives. I read The Colour Purple recently, and although it doesn't deal with enslaved people and the slave trade, it deals with American Black history, and that was really powerful book to read, so I do highly recommend that. I think actually I reviewed it on a recent video as well, so if I've got that I'll link that. So yeah, I would encourage you to find either non-fiction or fiction books, whichever the best kind of area is for you, and then to find a book and do your own exploration as well on bookshop websites and that kind of thing to find a narrative that appeals to you. But yeah, I know it's not necessarily supporting heritage, but it is supporting literature and it's supporting the arts, which I think it's really important to be supporting any kind of organisation, publisher that is looking into publishing these narratives more and supporting these narratives. So the third and final thing that I encourage you to do for Black History Month is to watch some documentaries online. Watch some stories, especially historical stories. So again, the heritage sector itself can't or doesn't produce currently documentaries or film content around their history, but there are a lot of documentaries and documentary filmmakers who are out there creating TV shows, documentaries, other forms of filmed content that look at the connection of heritage to slave trade and colonialism. So I'd encourage you to go out and have a look for those. There are a lot of streaming services at the moment that offer collections around Black History Month, where a lot of the documentaries that you would normally have to really delve deep into those streaming services to find are more easily accessible. Now, it's a bit problematic to me. I feel like those kind of documentaries should constantly be pushed to the top of streaming services anyway, not particularly just for 1 month of the year, but it is kind of good that they are being given a spotlight, because it means that more people will engage with that content. So what I would encourage you to do is have a look at those. But I actually had a quick look around for some documentaries that I thought might be good, and I found one on YouTube. If you Google, if you put into the YouTube search bar Timeline World History Documentaries, there is a whole channel called Timeline, and then they have, if you put Timeline British slave trade, I think I found at least 3 46 minute long documentaries about the British connection to the slave trade, and they look to be really well researched historical documentaries about it, so I really would recommend that you watch those. And generally, if you just go to British streaming sites like BBC, Channel 4, ITV, all of those kind of things, and search for Black British History or Black History Month or the slave trade, you will be able to find documentaries and programmes on those sites. Because it is the British slave trade that we're looking at here, that's why it's probably better to look on the British streaming services, because the American ones are obviously, for obvious reasons, looking more at the American side of the slave trade. But any kind of documentaries that are about the kind of Black British history or about the slave trade and colonialism in general are going to give you a really good overview of the topic and the subject matter, and are going to support those independent filmmakers, so that basically we can show that we enjoy that type of content, or that we are interested in that type of content, and they will go on then to create more, because that's what this is all about. That whole showing your support to in these different areas is about encouraging those organisations and those individuals to make more content, to continue to do that work and that research and that investigation, so that those narratives are told to more people. That's what this is all about at the end of the day. So yeah, I hope you've enjoyed listening to that. I know it's been quite a kind of talky video, but it's a topic that I feel really strongly and passionately about, and especially in connection with heritage, literature, history. I feel that, you know, it's an area that I'm so passionate and so ingrained in, that the only way for me to be able to continue to work in this sector is to be doing that work, to be looking through those narratives, to be doing and committing to telling those stories. I'm not really on the side of, not the sides, but I'm not really in line with that argument that this happened in the past, therefore let's just leave it in the past. No, I don't agree with that. I think that the whole history and heritage world is built on looking at the past. That's what we do. That's what museums do. It's what country houses do. And so if you're going to do that, if you're going to look through into the past, you've got to look at the whole story, and you've got to tell the whole story. And so this is why for Black History Month, I thought that we would focus on ways that you can support the heritage industry and the arts who are creating kind of projects and investigations around these narratives. So I hope you've enjoyed listening to that. Do let me know down below about books, documentaries, sites that you've been to, if you've seen a great exhibition. Let's have that narrative, but please do keep it kind. I've said this before, but any comments that are blatantly offensive will be deleted. I don't have to explain myself for that. You know why. And so, yeah, let's try and keep it really kind and really positive in the comments section. And I will be back next week with another video. Thank you very much. Subscribe if you're not already subscribed to my channel. I release new videos every Monday at 7 p.m. and I will see you again next week. Bye.